Welcome, everybody, to the HCMA's second briefing on Capitol Hill. We're really pleased to be with you here in the Rayburn Building, and our thanks to Mikey Sherrill's office, who helped organize this particular meeting today. Thank you very much. If you're in person with us, please help yourself to food and beverage while we educate you on some of the issues that are important to the HCMA this year. We're going to be talking about step therapy, prior authorizations, and rounding up with probably the most important topic of the day, generic drug quality, and what we can do about it. So this is your cast of characters for the day. We're all here to not only provide you with some insight from our own perspectives on these topics, but we're also going to be here for Q&A, so please do not be shy. Ask any questions you would like. We will have this in a little bit. We're going to scooch back to that one. Quickly about the HCMA, we're a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We provide information to those with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, which is a genetic heart muscle disorder, as well as other thick heart muscle disorders, with the hopes of preventing untimely deaths and advancing global understanding of the disease. We are committed to educating and advocating on behalf of our patients, our Center of Excellence partners, and industry to ensure that therapies reach patients in time. Just to give you a little understanding of who the HCMA is, we run a lot of different programs beyond advocacy on the Hill. We have a webinar tour that provides great information about 10 times per year to our constituents. We have developed 56 HCMA recognized centers of excellence in the United States. 30 are pipelined for the next few years, as well as bringing our international programs into existence in the next few years. We also have a podcast, Tales from the Heart. If you have not heard it, please look it up. We run a medical education program with our friends at PCM Scientific called HCM Academy. Information on that is available outside on the table. We work individually with patients every day, and we do about 1,000 navigation and intake calls per year, and we're currently serving well over 20,000 patients worldwide. We also offer online discussion groups for patients, and we are going to be building out a mental health network in the coming year. So we are doing a lot to support patients, and while we're doing all of this, we're also supporting clinical trials, research, and development of new therapies, up to and including genetic therapies. So quickly, my story, I'm not going to belabor it too much, but there's a box over there that says something that might give you a hint on how it ended. I come from a long family history of HCM, with my grandfather dying in 1953 at the age of 42. His sister died a few years later at 52 from a stroke. I was diagnosed at 12, and I've lost my uncle, my sister, my father since then. My first ICD went in when I was 27 years old, first pacemaker at 22. My daughter's been genetically identified, as have my niece and nephew, and my father passed back in 2008 at the age of 73 from not only heart failure, but kidney failure. We often forget that heart failure leads to kidney failure. My heart transplant, which is why there's a box over here, occurred when I was 48 years old. It has been 8 years. Please don't do the math. And just to prove that my body craves cardiac technology, last year I received a leadless pacemaker in my transplanted heart. So I try to get away from tech, and I don't get there. So this is a picture of me holding my heart 3 days after my heart transplant, and there's the photo of her, and anybody who wants to see it, stay tuned at the end, and I will give you an opportunity to actually see my old heart. This is a big journey, and getting into advocacy, people do it for a lot of different reasons. I didn't do it because of my transplant. I didn't do it because of my sister or just my grandfather or just my daughter or just my niece. It's everything. It's all of them. They all need our help, guidance, support, and our creativity to develop new therapies to improve their lives so they don't have to go through what I went through. Plenty of room on the other side. Come on in. So living and dying with HCM in America. So we've got about 150,000 people diagnosed. It's probably a little bit more than that right now, probably closer to 165. But there's 1.3 million people at risk for HCM. And we know from the CDC Wonder database that between 1999 and 2007, the average age, the highest level of deaths occurred in the 45 to 54-year-olds. We know from looking back at that database up to 21 that we've grown a decade. We're living a decade longer because of the work that so many people in this community are doing. But we need to find more of them. The symptoms of HCM can mimic asthma, anxiety, innocent murmur, or you're just out of shape and maybe you should eat better. No, this is a genetic disorder. We know what it comes from. It doesn't come from inactivity. It comes from our genes. So in the United States, we have centers of excellence in 26 states currently, hoping to grow that by about 2 or 3 more states in the next year or two. And hopefully, we will someday fill this entire map with red because that's the color of the centers on this map. If you have not heard anything about HCMA recognized centers of excellence, you can visit our website to learn more. We've also created a state report card. Now, I know we're on the federal level here, but y'all come from a state somewhere. And I'm proud to say New Jersey, my state, and Virginia have passed laws that include cardiac children safety questioning. So every well child examination in New Jersey since 2015 has asked about family heart health history and symptoms of the child. We have now brought that to Virginia, effective about a week ago. It goes into effect in a little while, but we are working on other bills in other states to get this law passed. It's really important that people know their family heart health history. So what's happening in hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, amyloidosis, Fabry's, Dannon's, and Pompe's is really exciting. We're in some, interesting times lately. We need to keep our eye on the prize. We are the leaders in scientific discovery and the evolution of therapies. We have so many investigational treatments underway right now. We can't stop that progress. We have underneath these new therapies generic therapies, which we're going to be talking about a little bit more today. And while we've had some of these generic therapies for a long time, maybe they're not as good as we thought they were, and we're going to present some data later that shows you where the problems are. Now I would like to ask Dr. Kenneth Taylor to come to the podium to talk to you about what these diseases are from a clinical point of view. Ken, thanks for joining us. The green button to go forward.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kenneth Taylor. I'm the director of the Hypertrophic Cardiomyopathy Program at Piedmont Heart in Atlanta, Georgia, a newly recognized HCMA Center of Excellence. So hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, as she mentioned, is a heart muscle disease. It's the most common genetic abnormality that affects the heart, and it leads to a thickening of the heart muscle. It's estimated to be about 1 in 250, though it's probably more common than that. There are actually a lot of people who have this disease but don't know it, and can carry a gene for it and be at risk for developing the gene with the disease without knowing about it. It's estimated that there could be as many as 1.3 million people in this country with this disease. Though, as she mentioned, there are fewer than that who are currently diagnosed. It is the most common reason why young athletes die. So whenever you hear about a basketball player or a soccer player dropping dead on court or pitch, it's typically from hypertrophic disease. So it does affect young people, but it affects people of all ages. It is a common contributor to many of the things we see in cardiology, such as congestive heart failure, strokes, arrhythmias. It's one of a number of heart muscle thickening diseases, of which it's actually probably the most common, with the exception of the last one in this, which is called HFpEF, which is a generic term for just people who have heart failure and their heart function is normal. But a large number of people in that category are just have a thick heart from things like high blood pressure. But hypertrophic disease is the most common of these other heart muscle diseases. And all of these diseases can lead to things like congestive heart failure, arrhythmias, strokes. They can present, as I mentioned, with sudden cardiac death, with heart failure. Patients with thickened heart muscles represent about half of the population of people who are admitted to hospitals with congestive heart failure, which is the number one cause of hospitalization, the number one cost to Medicare. It's the 800-pound gorilla in the cardiac world. It is what most people die of. So this is a major impact on the health community, on Medicare, and on costs. We have, as she mentioned, a lot of new drugs, particularly in the hypertrophic world, which are making this world very exciting. And we have a lot of new therapies that are available for patients with this. So, our job as clinicians is to identify those patients who have this disease and then get the appropriate therapy to them in a timely fashion. And I think with that,
maybe talk a little bit about Oh, no,
I think
I
that's.
thought I put it up there twice.
That's it.
That's it.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Very good.
Give us a second. Thank you, Ken. I thought I put another copy of the advanced drugs. So bravo to those who've already brought us drugs like mavacamten or Camzyos, and we have another one coming hopefully in September, aficamten, yet to be named, although I hear it's named and I don't know it yet. So it's an exciting time to have a bad disease because new therapies are coming, but stories of families who live with HCM are complicated and they take very twisted paths. And I'm going to have Amy come on up and tell us a little bit about her story. So Amy Blair, I came to know her about 2 years ago or so, and we started to work together. She came last year to Hill Day to tell the story of her daughter Jillian, which you'll hear about in a moment. But then she kind of, left her job, so I hired her. And she is now the newest nurse navigator at the HCMA. Amy, come to the podium, please.
Awesome. Hi, I'm Amy Blair, and I'm from Iowa. I am an RN from Iowa. It's nice to be here today. So the first time I ever heard the words hypertrophic cardiomyopathy within my family was actually from my sister-in-law. She was telling me about it. She mispronounced the name. She didn't tell me exactly what it meant, and she was talking about her own son and how he had just been diagnosed. At the time, my sister-in-law Susan had told us, that the doctors thought that maybe this was a gene that could have been passed down in the family, but they didn't know. They thought maybe it came from Susan, but my nephew needed to have a myectomy. And so we did not understand even at that time really what a myectomy was. I just understood he needed to have open heart surgery and have the thickness cleared out in his ventricle, and he was 14 years old. Dan had the surgery, my nephew. Everything went great. We didn't really think too much about it. It was something that Dan kind of had done, and we went on with our lives. And then a few years later, my brother John, who is Dan's father, got sick. And I was like, well, this is, maybe there is something more to this. And the doctors said, yeah, it probably is a genetically, inherited disease, but we believe it's a male-to-male thing. Your father probably had it and gave it to your brother, and your brother gave it to your nephew. My brother John was also going to have surgery, but not the same kind of surgery as Dan. He was going to have his valves cleaned out. He had an aneurysm. They went in there. John was a little bit out of shape. He was a bigger gentleman. And when he came out of the surgery, the doctors were like, his heart was very thick and enlarged, and we're not going to be able to do very much for it. We're just going to have to wait and see how John does. And John never left the hospital, and he died 28 days later from complications of HCM. So we all kind of just put that back into our rearview mirror and continued on with our lives again. My father, was a little not wanting to believe that this was a gene that he had. He always felt great, although half of his brothers and sisters had died of sudden cardiac arrests. We never put it together in our family. We would call it the ward heart or the bad heart that some of us got. But we never really put it together that it was an actual gene that we were passing through. And then in 2021, my father at the age of 91, walked into his favorite bar, ordered his tall boy, sat down at the card table with his friends, had him deal him in. And they said about an hour into it, he coughed twice and then just kind of fell asleep at his cards. He had the winning hand in his hand and just went down. The doctors said it looked like a bomb had went off in his left side of his heart. So there were red flags in my family. There were things that we could have pieced together that we were missing, and we were not talking enough with our doctors to really understand from the correct kind of doctors what was going on. 1 year and 2 months after my father died in 2021, it was 2022. And I took my 17-year-old daughter, Jillian, into our primary care physician's office, whom we had seen her entire life, to get her senior year's well child check, her last well child check she was ever going to get. And the doctor put that stethoscope up on her chest, turned around and looked at me and said, "When did Jill get this heart murmur?" And I said, "Jill doesn't have a heart murmur." And she said, "No, Jill has a significant heart murmur." And from there, we had an appointment that led to a pediatric cardiologist with an echo telling us that she had hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. And we were hearing words like severe and obstructed, and we were sent to specialists. And they wanted to get all of the cardiac MRIs, all of the tests done so that they could piece this puzzle together to help this 17-year-old girl who was totally healthy, right, on Tuesday, and on Friday was suddenly dealing with this huge illness. So we got the very last test result on April 21st, 2022, which was her genetic test results. And when it came through, it was positive for the MYBPC3, which I was positive for, my brother John was positive for, my nephew Danny was positive for, and Jillian had it. She drove home from school. I sat her down. I told her at our kitchen island, you have this gene. We're going to find out on Monday kind of what the plan's going to be. They said it's going to be okay. And she said, okay, that's about what I expected. We had a very easy 5-minute conversation. She ran upstairs to get ready for her little part-time job. She had a smile on her face. I took out at the back door with my dog, walked around the backyard, came around the front, and I saw that her car was still parked in the driveway. And I was like, she should have been gone by now. I called her from the garage. She didn't answer. I ran up the stairs and I found her collapsed in her bedroom from a sudden cardiac arrest. And we lost Jillian that day. Even though I had an AED that I was able to get on her body within 2 minutes of finding her, even though the EMS got there within 3 minutes of me calling, it just wasn't enough. We didn't have enough time to save her. 5 months after Jill died, it was going to be her 18th birthday. The day before her 18th birthday, we were going to have this great big huge party for her celebration, even though she wasn't going to be there. Everybody was coming. My sister Kathy was not wanting to come. She told me that she was just feeling heartbroken of everything that had happened. She didn't want to go to Jill's birthday. She wanted Jill to be there. Kathy was getting ready for bed the night before Jill's birthday. She was taking off her socks in her recliner, and she suffered a sudden cardiac arrest, and she died in her recliner. She was 68. My brother was 55. My nephews had a myectomy at 14 and 28. My daughter Jillian died at 17. My father died at 91. I don't know what killed my sister Kathy for sure. I tell everybody she's a casualty because she died of a broken heart, because that's what HCM does to a family. It comes through and it just wrecks them sometimes. And there are casualties that may or may not even be from HCM. You don't know, because it is so heartbreaking to go through and lose person after person after person. It wears on those who don't even have the gene or do have the gene, and they don't have the symptoms. It's just literally heartbreaking to live with. So I was able to work with the doctors in Omaha who had treated Jill. We got my family totally tested. 32 of my cousins got tested. I now know 25% of my cousins have it. Half my siblings have it. We've been able to fill our family up with the knowledge to be able to move forward, knowing who has it, who can pass it down, and how we can protect ourselves. Because right now we're living in a world that we have the science, we have the medications, we have everything that's built up for this moment. And my family is at a better chance right now of living with this gene than ever before. But so are other people's families. Because living in Iowa and working with all of these people at these clinics that are coming in with AFib, and we send them over and they find out that they've had a HCM or they have a heart condition. All of these people that are out there that are living with all of these heart diseases that we are able to diagnose and find now, it's amazing. And we have actual treatments that actually treat HCM, which even in 2022, when we lost Jill, they were just beginning. This is the time. We didn't have the time with my people, but that doesn't mean that we don't have the time with others. And so my hope and my mission now is really that my family gets to have all the time, to have all the love and live their lives, but so do other people's families. It goes on beyond this. There are so many people out there that we can really change lives on. And I don't want other people to have to go through what my family went through, and we don't have to. Thank you.
Every time I hear the story, it reminds me of so many families I've worked with for so many years. Ji- Jill, Amy, thank you so much for sharing your story. And the timing of Jillian's death does time almost perfectly to the launching of our first labeled indication drug in April of 22. Like they're literally days apart. So that's kind of one of those odd things in life. Okay, so we are going to start now talking about step therapy and prior authorizations leading to a delay in care. You're going to hear from a physician perspective and a patient perspective, but I just want to get everybody on the same page here. When we're dealing with pharmaceuticals today, it is a really complex maze. Now, this schematic up here does not explain the entire experience of a patient. This is only after they've seen the doctor, after they've had the test, after they get the results, and they get a medication prescribed that is a new, not a generic, now we're talking about new meds. This is the distribution pathway. You've got the research and development. The companies, oh, we just lost our screen up there. There it is. We have it back. The companies are offering copay assistance programs to patients. The patients are cost sharing back to the pharmacy. There's negotiated payments between the PBMs and the pharmacies. Then the health plans get involved. And the money's going back and forth and up and down and over and around. And it's a really complex maze for people to understand in and out of the healthcare systems. We would love to see some PBM reform, which probably will help the situation a bit, but we all need to understand where the problems are and the barriers are. The next problem is, with that entire maze and all those arrows and which way the money goes, there's typically a prior authorization that needs to be completed, whether it's for your drug or for a procedure, a test. Everything seems to have pre-authorizations now, and they take a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of wasted energy. We've heard the terms fraud, waste, abuse. We have. But in this case, the fraud, waste, and abuse is being perpetrated on the healthcare system, the patients and their families, by stealing their time, stealing their access to care in a timely manner, and going through this maze that is administratively ridiculous, and it's not adding to anything but the cost of healthcare at a price estimated at $1.3 billion a year, just on paperwork. That's nonsense. We're going to see a story now from Alberto, who's going to show you what happened to him after 2.5 years on a labeled indication drug. What happens next? Alberto, thanks for joining us. Thank you. Stage is yours. I'm going to grab that. I don't want to whack heads. There you go.
All right, perfect. Hi, how are you? My name is Alberto Reyes. I was diagnosed with HCM at the age of 16. Regular checkup, sort of like your daughter Amy, where they heard a heart murmur, took me in, ran me through a battery of tests the whole day, and dropped the bomb on a 16-year-old, not knowing what any of it means, and trying to live with that. We went through. I have 2 kids, and as you can see in the picture above, we had them tested. They're thankfully negative as of now, and everything is working well with that. When it comes to the step therapy, in February, I had a denial letter from my insurance company that I wasn't aware had come through the mail. I only knew because I called my pharmacy to refill my prescription, as I normally would every month, and they advised me I needed a prior authorization, which I found a little bit weird because I've been on it for 2.5 years with no issues. I called my doctor's office. He immediately called me back and told me, yes, I'm aware. We already sent him a letter over advising why you need the medication and that they're basically, doing something illegal here and it's not right. So I took it upon myself to call the insurance company because I was running out of my medicine and was trying to move the ball along. They told me I can't speak to anybody until February 20th. That's when the review was going to be completed. I'm like, okay, but there's absolutely nobody I can talk to. They said, no, sorry, you can't talk to anybody, can't have your input. Which I found a little bit asinine. I went over and then tried to work with my wife's insurance company, or our insurance company, but through her employer with their representative, and tried to see what we can move the ball there on that side. We were able to get my prescription 2 days after my last dose of Camzyos finished for the month, for a 1-month extension that Anthem said they were giving because of the relationship with the employer and because of the short notice that they said they provided me. And luckily, working through that amount of time, I worked with Dr. Warren. Told me to call the manufacturer and I came up with Plan B, which was to be on a relief bridge program that would help me throughout the coming months to figure out exactly how to move forward with this denial letter I kept receiving from Anthem. At one point, I got my last denial letter, and 2 days later, out of nowhere, a miracle working with HCM org, I got a letter saying that I was given a prescription for a year, which I was like, okay, cool, that works for me. But what happens next year? Now I have to think about, I'm planning on what happens next year. What fight do I have to do next year? And time that I have to waste next year. Camzyos really helped me from, lifting my kids up from the ground and playing with them, running around, where, you feel a little bit dizzy when you come up real too quick. Now I could do that no problem, run up the stairs with them, have fun, chase the dog around too now. That's my third child. You can see him there. And that's where I'm at with my journey with step therapy. Hopefully we can pass this bill that'll help us eliminate a lot of this for everybody, not just myself. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I get this phone call from Ron Wharton on my cell phone. Lisa, I got a problem. It's like, what do you guys do about stuff like this? I'm like, well, we could write a letter or we could take you to Capitol Hill. So we took him to Capitol Hill. Ron, come tell us your side of the story from the physician's perspective.
Thank you very much for having me, Lisa. My name is Ron Wharton. I direct the hypertrophic cardiomyopathy program at North Shore University Hospital, which is part of the Northwell Health System in New York State and now Connecticut as well, as of a couple of days ago, because they keep expanding. And it's a privilege to be doing hypertrophic cardiomyopathy now, precisely because, as Lisa alluded to, it's only in the past 3 years that we finally have medications that are specifically designed to treat this condition. For over 6 decades, we were treating patients with rather inexpensive drugs that had modest effects at the cost of some side effects, none of which were actually designed to treat hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, but were all repurposed for it because it had some favorable physiologic benefits, again, at the cost of some side effects. And we're now on the precipice of a whole new era of being able to treat this condition with medications specifically designed for it that no longer require patients to have to think about undergoing open heart surgery or other procedures to relieve their symptoms. It's really a terrific time. But of course, new medications are very expensive, and that's understandable because it takes a lot of money to bring a medication to market, a lot of research and development. And if you want companies to do more research and development, these drugs cost money. And insurance companies have a very, very simple business model, which is accept premiums and deny claims. Works very, very well. It doesn't, if you think about it. And most insurance companies, when I think they sign you up, don't give you a warning that's saying, we're happy to cover you, just don't get sick. And if you get sick, don't get sick with anything that costs a lot. So with that, Mr. Reyes had a fairly severe form of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, and I don't think there's any HIPAA violation here. His wall thickness was about 3 centimeters. It should be about 1, so it's 3 times as big as it should be. And with that comes a lot of trouble, like breathlessness, severe fatigue, and as he could tell you better than I could. And because of the new medications that we now have and will have, he can run around after his dog. And he'd been on medications to treat this condition for over 2 years. Now, I don't understand the logic that when a new year comes, all of a sudden the insurance company has to ask, well, are you still sick? it's January now, right? It's like it's a new year. Do you still need it? You know, and my answer, I always want to answer, no, he doesn't need it. He just likes taking medications. And I like writing prescriptions for expensive drugs that patients don't need. You know, this is how I like to waste my time. But in fact, my time is wasted all the time. I write letters to insurance companies addressing these denials, and I try to make each letter more progressively acerbic. Because, you know, I mean, I have to have some fun doing this. I mean, you can either laugh or cry. So, you know, I might as well laugh about it. But the truth is, I wrote my letter here. Now, the text here is probably too small for most of you to read. So I'm going to read it to you. And it says, Dear Anthem, it has come to my attention that you need a letter explaining the rationale for the continued use of Camzyos for Mr. Reyes. And by the way, as an aside, this is just the first of many drugs. There will be another drug at the end of September, and there's more coming. But anyway, are you aware that Mr. Reyes has been prescribed Camzyos since August 2022, i.e. for almost 2.5 years? Are you aware that despite treatment with the maximum dose of Camzyos, which is 15 milligrams a day, he also needs treatment with both metoprolol succinate 200 milligrams a day and disopyramide 150 milligrams 3 times a day? Now I go into bold. Yes, he needs 3 agents, one of which is Camzyos at its maximum dose to stay functional. It would be criminal to deny Camzyos for Mr. Reyes. This medication took him from New York Heart Association heart failure class 3 to class 1. If you cannot approve Camzyos for Mr. Reyes, then you can approve it for no one. Perhaps that is your goal. Mr. Reyes will need Camzyos. Please kindly stop attempting to jeopardize his health and kindly stop wasting my time. I am more than happy to discuss any of the above by phone with you. Please be assured that any conversations will be recorded. And then I ended it with a very, very sweet little epilogue. If necessary, I will encourage Mr. Reyes to file a formal complaint with the New York State Department of Consumer Affairs and seek any necessary legal counsel. I mean, I do have fun with this. But, you know, I mean, I don't know how many of you are in an industry where you work hard to get something done. And then all that has to happen is it's a new month, and you're back at square one. Asinine is a good word. It was used before. I think it's very, very apropos. But this is, you know, and by the way, I can't send the insurance company, you know, a bill for all the time I waste writing these absurd, ridiculous letters, okay? Okay, I'm not reading echocardiograms. I'm not doing patient care. I'm writing things that I shouldn't have to write, you know. And by the way, the kinds of objections that I get for these drugs are not just that it's a new year. Okay, if I have a patient on metoprolol, which is a beta blocker, very, very old type of medication, I'll get letters from the insurance company. Well, you've tried metoprolol. Did you try Inderal? Did you try atenolol? Did you try bisoprolol? And then I respond, do you have any data that your these beta blockers work any better than the ones that I'm already using? And if you do have that data, could you please share it with me and the rest of the cardiology community, because none of us have seen it. But this is the kind of nonsense that we deal with all of the time, okay? And only in medicine does it seem to be allowed. So any help we could get would be appreciated, and thank you for your attention.
And now you all understand why I said, I think I can do something with that one, Ron. So we have a break in our agenda here because we have a bit of an announcement to come, and we have a representative from Representative LaHood's office coming to speak to you. So please come to the microphone. Share some good news.
Good evening, everyone. How's everyone doing today? There we go. First, I want to thank HCMA for hosting this event and allowing me to speak before you all this evening. I'm glad to be here with such passionate advocates and experts for such a great cause. Quickly about myself, I'm Austin Welter with Congressman Darren LaHood. I'm one of Congressman LaHood's legislative assistants, and I've been with the Congressman for a little over 5 years now, after I started off as an intern with the office. And as someone from the Congressman's district, Illinois 16th Congressional District, passionate and fortunate enough to work for the people that I was born and raised around, and it's a truly honor and a privilege to work for Illinois 16th Congressional District here. As we gather here today to spread awareness about HCM, I want to underscore that today is about connection, collaboration, and momentum. It's about sharing what's working, identify what needs to be changed, and feeling the passion that brought us to this work really in the first place at the end of the day. You know, it's estimated that 1 in 500 people in the population have HCM, and it's the most common inherited heart disease. In the United States alone, it's estimated that 700,000 to 1.6 million people have HCM. And the sad part about that is 85% remain undiagnosed. With that being said, I'm proud to announce that yesterday Congressman LaHood introduced a resolution expressing support for the designation of the fourth Wednesday of February as HCM Awareness Day. With that, I kindly request that you reach out to your members of Congress, share the news about this resolution, see if it's something he or she could support. I know that would go a long ways. HCM knows no political party, and it's going to take all of us to spread the word and awareness around this. I know it's a simple resolution, but it's going to go a long way with the advocates and individuals that are affected every day by HCM. I would be remiss if I did not take one quick moment to highlight and mention Lynn Richardson, who passed away from HCM. Lynn's family is with us here today, and I know she would be proud of the work that we're all doing here. So again, thank you for all being here today. Thank you for the work that you do every day. And again, I'm grateful to be here with you. And thank you for the advocacy that continues to move us forward. It's going to take all of us at the end of the day. So let's meet the moment and let's do this together.
Well, that was a fun surprise. We should have that kind of thing happen every time we come to the Hill. Okay, now we're getting to the meat of the substance of today. Not that the first topic wasn't important, but generic drug quality is a major problem. I purposely placed these bottles on the podium today because you think you know what they are, but do you really know what they are? And we're going to hear from, which way are we doing this? Oh, here we go. Okay, Vic Suarez, retired colonel from the U.S. Army and founder and principal of Growth Partners Blue Zone Bio, is going to start our talk, and then we're going to hear from David Light. So, Vic, come on up.
All right, good evening, everyone. I'm honored to be here today and really be here with the ACM community. What I wanted to start off and say is the two most important dates in your life are the day you were born and the day that you realize what the purpose is for your life. And that for me was a February moment in 2004 in Iraq when I was a Charlie Med commander. This is a commander of about 100 medics and docs and PAs that were trying to save lives on the battlefield. I served 27 years in the military, and I realized during that time frame that one of the things I was commit myself to was keeping people alive that were most at vulnerable risk, whether it was from an enemy, whether it was from a chronic disease, a rare disease, a genetic disorder, or a worldwide pandemic. Fast forward another 20 years, or 15 and a half years, and I found myself after having a career in highly deployable units for 10 years, trying to save people's lives in war zones. I got into product development, whether it was medical devices and then eventually biologics, and created a bunch of vaccines with a bunch of scientists. And I culminated my career before I left the military as I was pulled up into Operational Warp Speed and was the lead program manager of the Moderna vaccine. Matter of fact, one of my partners here, Taylor in the back, was an instrumental player in supporting us in accelerating the emergency use authorization of that vaccine that led to the survival of probably hundreds of thousands of people, not only in this country, but across the world. And I realized when I retired from the military a year and a half ago that I was going to commit my life to doing things that were only meaningful to that purpose and align with organizations that were to that end. And so this is an area that I wanted to introduce to you about, and then you're going to hear a little bit more about the data and really a landmark study that I've been involved with for over 2 years. And that's this DoD-led actionable transparency study for drug quality and to fix the nation's drug supply chain crisis. So what you're going to see right now is we're going to show you a series of information about the pharma supply chain crisis we have in the United States, calls to action from various organizations, why the DoD is engaged in this, the Defense Department, some outcomes and costs of low-quality generic medicines There are a lot of good quality generic medicines, by the way, and we'll show you some of the data that gets to that. And then some solutions that are actionable that can be implemented right now, and those that are being implemented now from a very large leading civilian healthcare organization. And we're going to show you some drug quality testing results, and we're going to make some policy proposals that could really bend the arc on healthcare in the United States and, quite frankly, for global health. So there's a growing concern. It's been there for many, many years. Media's covered this, whether it was Bloomberg, New York Times, think tanks, Wall Street Journal. This has been going on for about 2 decades or more, where we've globalized our medical supply chains, and they shifted more from domestically made pharmaceuticals or those that are made with our allied partners in Europe, and they've shifted to places like China and India, where there's a lot more different standards, let's say, with the chemistry, manufacturing controls, and the quality, rigidity of the supply chain and the manufacturing. And the supply chain's in crisis. I mean, we have all-time drug shortages, well over 300 drug shortages for a while now, and it peaked last year at around 323 in early 2024. And this is a problem that's not only a challenge to global public health and United States, individual health, but it's also becomes a geopolitical risk. When we have the supermajority of key starting materials and active pharmaceutical ingredients and precursors originating from our number one adversarial nation, China, that puts our whole entire nation at risk. So the Defense Department looked at this as a major defense threat, but it also is a threat because if any of those materials are embargoed or not exported for a period of months, that affects everybody in this room that has a loved one that's taking a medicine, right? So it impacts everybody. So what I wanted to show you with this chart is that the FDA does a really, really good job of all the pre-approval processes typically for a drug. So on the upper part on the left is for a new drug approval. This is a rigorous process that takes anywhere from like 5 to 12 years and $1 billion to get a drug to marketplace. And it's usually done by very large pharma companies or biopharma companies that have big budgets, investors that are going to do these rigorous studies, research and development, the manufacturing controls and the quality to get at a drug that's formulated just right and tested in a population of maybe 10,000 or more individuals in a phase 3 trial. On the lower part, you see what we call an ANDA, an abbreviated new drug application. Now, this is something that was created in law back in 1984, the Hatch-Waxman Act. And at the time, what that law did was it bifurcated the market. It created a new line of generic medicines that were able to create an abbreviated pathway to licensure, basically making a copycat of the brand name drug when that came off of patent. And then it split the market in two, where you had the high-end, brand new drug market. Now, it was a great legislation at the time, but what soon followed was a globalization effort to move all those manufacturing supply chains over to Asia, primarily China and India. And they had a motivation to actually lower the cost of goods sold by doing some things like investing less in the quality system, procuring supplies and materials, whether they're key chemicals and processes that weren't of the highest quality, or maybe not doing those additional quality checks and release testing of drugs. And it was really self-reported because on the far end, what you see there is quality and safety and monitoring is suffering. Matter of fact, the GAO has rated since 2009 that the FDA's ability to regulate overseas manufacturing has been high risk since 2009 after the heparin scandal, where hundreds of Americans died taking a blood thinner medicine with infected medicine coming out of the API. So what we see here is a challenge because right now in that part of the equation, after the drug has been licensed, there's a lack of monitoring control. Sometimes there's plants overseas that haven't been inspected at all, or at least over 5 years. And when the FDA goes there, they have to give them 6 to 8 weeks notice, and they still find major problems with these facilities, and they end up closing down for a period of time to remediate the problem, and that causes further drug shortages. And the number one cause of the drug shortages, other than a market failure with really a race to the bottom to make the cheapest drug possible, is really a quality problem at the root cause, is a lack of quality that leads to basically corrective actions at a plant in a marketplace that concentrates overly the production in just 1 or 2 facilities in the world. So when one of those facilities comes offline for 6 months or 3 weeks, it affects the entire global supply chain and affects everybody in this room. And so there's been broad calls to action from whether it's the government agencies like HHS ASPR, who said, hey, maybe we should actually look at the quality of the medicines as another metric other than cost, and maybe where the drugs come from. You get think tanks like Brookings. Bloomberg's called this out in some of their articles, and even the Senate Finance Committee in a bipartisan way has called this out as early as 2020. And so what happened was a great thing happened in 2022 in the FY23 National Drug, the National Defense Authorization Act of FY23, Section 860, called out that the Defense Department is now going to be directed to look at where the drugs are coming from, but also look at any other pieces of information where we can assess risk. And so I was on active duty on this, and I was a senior commander of a global pharmaceutical and medical devices supply chain organization that had global responsibilities. And I said, this might be a great opportunity for some of the things I've been seeing for the last decade to do something about this. And I had conversations with senior people at the highest levels of the Pentagon, to the Joint Staff Surgeon, the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Health Affairs, and said, hey, why don't we take a look at some of the quality aspects of these pharmaceuticals and then test them in an environment where we can use science to evaluate the actual chemical properties of these drugs and see how they actually stack up, and then look at where they come from, and then eventually look at the patient outcomes. And so that law was the start of a program that's a landmark study. And that landmark study is a 2-year project at the Uniformed Services University. This is essentially the Defense Department's medical school. I'm an adjunct assistant professor there as well. And it's called the Assessing of the Security and Quality of the U.S. Military Health System Pharmaceutical Supply Chain Pilot Study, or what we call FACTS. We want the facts. We want transparency in the quality of these medicines. And so the DoD, looking at a bunch of alternatives for different independent laboratories to actually do this assessment, looked at a bunch of academic and commercial models, and ultimately came across a pioneer in this space. And this is a lab called Valisure. It's an independent ISO 17025 lab that's been in this space for about 10 years. And they were actually instrumental in recalling some very, very concerning medicines. Zantac probably being the number one back in 2019 with some of their testing of the active pharmaceutical ingredient ridinidine. And that drug got canceled. It resulted in a major lawsuit, matter of fact, a $2.2 billion settlement for 80,000 patients. And so that laboratory is now represented by the president, David Light, and he's one of the founders of it. And I'm going to turn it over to him because he's going to show you some of the study results of this 2-year study. We're about halfway through. So Dave, come on up.
Thank you very much, Vic, and for the leadership of yourself and the Defense Department for really trying to not only take this seriously and dig into it, but make it a model for the nation in being able to do something about it. Also, thank you very much, Lisa and the HCMA team, for inviting me today and for just really being also pioneers from the patient advocacy standpoint on this topic. And I can say that it was actually a doctor that had, I believe, one of the largest hypertrophic cardiomyopathy practices at the Cleveland Clinic, Dr. Harry Lever, that originally connected us 6-7 years ago, and was one of the first doctors to point out that these problems are happening. He was seeing it with his patients. If you read the book Bottle of Lies by Catherine Ebman, there's a whole chapter about him, about how he was finding patients that had issues all of a sudden come up with their treatment, and he simply changed the manufacturer of the drug, of the generic drug, to a different manufacturer, and they got better. Not always, but it was a problem that he consistently saw, and he pushed FDA and anybody who would listen to address this. And so hopefully we're making some real progress with this in not only adding more visibility and transparency to it, but making that transparency actionable, which is really the core of this study. And to back up even before we get into the data on the study, just to point out, there's a growing body of evidence and a lot of research out there, foundational research, on these issues, and especially with narrow therapeutic index drugs. like anti-epileptic drugs, anticonvulsants. One of my good friends, Adam, a co-founder of Valisure with me, that's how Valisure started, was he was feeling these problems with his own anticonvulsant meds, talking to his doctors and saying, hey, all of a sudden I got a refill and now I have all these side effects and relapses sometimes. And the doctors tell him, listen, yeah, there's supply chain issues. You get a bad batch every once in a while. And obviously that's not an answer he liked. And so we formed a company to actually follow up on these issues, do independent chemical testing, and try to be a solution of how we can plug this into the supply chain. But to go back to the data from a lot of these epidemiological studies, and there's more of them coming out, is showing that there are real healthcare damages to these worst quality generics. Not all generics, but some of them that are objectively lower quality than the rest can really be leading to very serious negative healthcare outcomes, anywhere from additional hospitalizations, outpatient visits, to if your organ transplant drug like tacrolimus for your $1 million heart transplant isn't working well, you may lose that heart. You're literally taking $1 million procedure that your life depends on and risking it on a $5 generic. It just doesn't make sense. But if you look at all of this data, and some of the key opinion leaders in this space are starting to crunch the numbers, and I think a pretty conservative estimate is you're somewhere around $16 billion a year in avoidable healthcare costs just in chronic disease due to these roughly 10% lowest quality or red-rated generic drugs, over $200 billion in 10 years if this wasn't addressed. And the good news is there is a growing network of health systems, top key opinion leaders, academic universities. University of Kentucky even announced their own independent testing program for their hospitals and health systems. NYU Langone doing external testing. A variety of top academic centers and hospitals and medical schools researching this further. And one of the most important parts is large scalable solutions. Large health systems like Kaiser Permanente with 12, 13 million members, and the military, really taking steps to finding solutions for this. The military is not just our war fighters. It's also the military health system is almost 10 million people. It's their families, it's the retirees. And it was honestly the fact that Kaiser was taking a first mover approach as a large health system that I think enabled a lot of the interest of the DoD that something can be done at scale. And all of this is really complementary to the FDA efforts. The FDA's job is to look at the process of these drugs. Process is, you're never going to have a perfect process. There's always going to be some issues that fall through. You also can't test every single product, but that's why they work complementary together. It's what we see a lot in Europe, in the European Medicines Agency. They work with over a dozen independent laboratories throughout Europe. And we were the first in the United States, and we hope that this continues to grow as real actionable solutions that work in unison with FDA and others. And what we've seen of these models, just to highlight it, is that Kaiser Permanente for a number of years now has been looking at a whole bunch of data to try and identify the highest quality manufacturer to be buying from, to contract from, essentially having a green-rated manufacturer. And then they require them in their contracting, just like that HHS ASPR report that Vic had highlighted, to reform their procurement protocols to include quality, not just price. And so they require independent testing of every batch, and that's entirely plausible and realistic and is being done for dozens of medicines now in the Kaiser system. That is being done before it gets to their warehouse. So it's part of the contract, part of the requirements, and we know it's scalable. And really what Vic and the team and all the way to Assistant Secretary of Defense for Health Affairs, Martinez Lopez, as he said in the Senate Armed Services Committee hearing last year about this, is that this is a model for the nation, and part of doing that is getting the data more universally to say, well, which are the green-rated manufacturers, and how can we objectively come to that conclusion and that data with at least snapshots of information. And that's really the crux of this project, is getting red, yellow, green data on all the various suppliers of that drug, and ideally making that actionable to pick the green and have that being tested consistently is a full circle model that we know works at scale. And just to highlight that this isn't just a one-off concept or in theory. This was published in the Journal of the American Pharmacists Association with a consortium of healthcare leaders to build what that framework is. And it's actually these co-authors that comprise the Defense Department Expert Review Panel. We generate a lot of data at Valisher. What is suspected of red also goes through secondary testing. And all of that data comes together where it is actually reviewed by the expert panel that sets the red, yellow, green, the actual framework for how these are scored. And it's a risk score, to be clear. So red doesn't automatically mean that it's so bad that it's illegal to be on the market. That does sometimes happen. Zantac and ranitidine products was unfortunately a good example. But it's just objectively higher risk than the competitors. And it's something that should be addressed. Perhaps it can be fixed. But from our limited amount of information, we're able to make those differentiations and those conclusions to improve the procurement practices and to reward green, to reward those that are the highest quality, to motivate continuous improvement, not just making drugs to the minimum standard, which is, if you read the CFRs, GMP, good manufacturing practice, is the minimum standard. Would you like 4 micrograms of lead in a product, or how about 0 micrograms of lead? The legal limit is 5. But that's the point is to drive to continuous improvement and address risk. So these are to get to the data, these are the first 6 drugs. A lot of times we get asked if it's a military project, is this drugs that are only relevant for the military? Absolutely not. These are drugs that are essential medicines for the nation. They're essential medicines for forward deployment and for the warfighter. It's an essential medicine for the military health system, and they're essential medicines for America. And you have a lot of drugs here that are obviously very important for hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, drugs like tacrolimus that are important for organ transplant, metoprolol for heart failure and high blood pressure. And these are drugs that there are millions and millions of prescriptions every year. And these are just the first 6. There's about 40 drugs on the essential medicines list as part of this 2-year project. And happy to share a lot more data on this. We actually just presented last week at the Defense Department State of the Science Symposium. But the grand conclusion is, yes, there are reds. The red rate is somewhere around 10%. That's the same as we've seen in many different kinds of studies. But the good news is that 2/3 are green, even after a whole battery of tests. The majority of the generic drugs on the market are high quality and low cost, and we should be incentivizing more of that. And all of the outcomes, data, and calculations we were talking about are really about those objectively lowest quality 10% that we should incentivize avoiding or fixing, and focusing on the green. And we even see, even in these initial 6, there are some drugs that are, relatively speaking, low risk. In this scenario, they were all green. There are some drugs, unfortunately, like tacrolimus, that are very high risk. Not only is it a narrow therapeutic index, it's a hard drug to make. And we're finding that 1/3 in this scenario is red, 1/3 green. And it's certainly drugs that we should pay close attention to. So this is just a snapshot of what it actually looks like. So this is the various, over a dozen different manufacturers or labelers, really, of the drug metoprolol succinate, and looking at a variety of different analytics for it, and seeing the scoring implications, what those various columns are. And a lot of them were fine. Dosage levels or the potency was correct. Various carcinogens weren't present. There were some issues with toxic elements like lead. But one of the largest issues we saw with metoprolol was dissolution. And that's what you're seeing in the graph on the right, is how the drug actually dissolves over time. This is some of the most common problems that we see. And you see the dark black line is the brand that went through the full approval and all the thousands of people clinical trials. And then in the gray are all the various generics and how they dissolve over time. And again, good news, many of them quite close to the brand. But some you don't need advanced algorithms and analytics to see they're different. They're substantially different statistically, and therefore give an objective red. We've seen this as well with tacrolimus, an actually pretty extreme case with tacrolimus where a number of generics is certainly a little different than the brand, and some generics extremely different, dissolving over 3 times faster than the original brand, and generating a variety of reds and yellows here. Turns out that actually the FDA received so many complaints about one of these particular manufacturers that showed up red in this testing as well, that after 11 years of receiving these complaints, the FDA also ran some clinical analysis and found that these differences were so vast that they were not considered bioequivalent between this particular generic manufacturing and comparing it to the brand. And on the left there is actually the FDA's own data, looking at the generic versus brand, and seeing obviously by eye a very clearly different profile of how the drug is actually releasing in the bloodstream. And we see the same thing. Didn't take 11 or 12 years, just a few weeks or a few months of testing in a laboratory. We're seeing that in the dissolution rates, the in vitro in-lab test, aligning very much with the clinical test that takes a long time. And one of the most common questions that we get, especially on the Hill, is, okay, well, what about cost? We've run this analysis many times. There is no correlation between the cost, the price of the drug, and these are actual prices paid from wholesalers when we're acquiring this, and its quality score. It's what we scientists call a shotgun plot. It's just all over the place. That just shows you that if we're really looking at the formulary, now we're looking at real formulary information from the Defense Department formulary, which I should have highlighted before is very much similar to the rest of the private market formulary. And the other big question is also, where are these actually coming from? Right, so we have our quality that we just talked about, and there's also not just the chemical quality, but the location quality. And we started looking into this, at somewhat of a high level to look at least deeper than what it says on the bottle. And unfortunately, there's a whole world of concern over the fact that what it means to be TAA compliant or Trade Act compliant to sell to the Federal Supply Schedule is that the sticker was made in the United States. That's, as a scientist, I get concerned about that, and if that is true of where the drug is actually made. But I'll let folks debate over that. But the bottom line is, when we're being asked, do we have any information on the true origin of these products? Well, that information is hard to get, but does exist, and we're starting to extract that. And part of what we're proposing as policies that we get even deeper information around this and create also a red, yellow, green score on the location quality. But even with the high-level information going to the headquarters of the parent company that actually manufactures this, we see some interesting trends. No, they're not all made in the United States. And B, can we make some comparisons of where these are truly made and some of these quality metrics? And there's just a month ago, one of the leaders in this space, Professor John Gray from Ohio State University, published a paper with others that showed some interesting correlations. Serious adverse events are 54% higher for the true Indian-made pharmaceuticals versus the U.S. ones. Not to say that India can't produce a quality product, but there is a concentration of low-quality manufacturers in certain countries. And so really what we're pushing for, and I think one of the most actionable direct policy proposals here, is to make an amendment to the NDAA, just like it was really effective in getting the Defense Department to look into this in the first place, that we're calling the Transparency and Quality in Pharmaceuticals Act, where we're using this data, obviously generate more of this data, including a location score, to then reform the procurement protocols so that it's not just price. Whether you're talking about drug shortages and the major driver of that of being quality problems and all the witnesses telling in a bipartisan way that we have no transparency to quality. The FDA wrote a paper about this in 2012, well before COVID, saying that the root cause of drug shortages is the blindness to quality and the inability to use that as part of procurement. And on the left there is really what's being used now. This is, again, modeled with real data on the drug lisinopril, one of the most common drugs in the United States, blood pressure medicine. And on the DoD formula, at least, there's 8 different options. And they're all FDA approved. That's the information you have right now. They're FDA approved, and there's the price. Our proposal is simple: to use the data that we're generating as part of procurement. We have quality data, and good news, the majority is green. Not too hard to just avoid the red. And can we add in there other metrics like location quality as a further evaluation and getting the best value product? Other elements like independent certification that Kaiser's already requiring. This was labeler number 1 is actually a company already doing that. Can they perhaps get some bonus points for doing so? Could there be other elements if the FDA actually generates these 5-star quality management maturity ratings? I've been talking about it for over a decade. That could be another column. There could be many ways once you start building this out as not just a 1-column exercise to get a best value of where we're putting our procurement dollars and where we're incentivizing, hopefully, American manufacturing when available and high quality, affordable medicines. I mean, it's really a low-hanging fruit. And we're pushing also for an ARPA-H project that will even build a software platform to be able to pipe this through all users of national drug codes, which is everybody in the United States. And according to the Drug Supply Chain Security Act, which has been a big driver for developing software to connect all the stakeholders, can we have quality information flow through that is, I think, a big aggressive goal. And it would be great to have ARPA-H lead into that as well. And so that's, I think, the summary version of everything, and I really appreciate the attention and engagement from Lisa and the Hypertrophic Cardiomyopathy Association. Big thanks to Harry and connecting everybody. And obviously happy to take any questions when there's time for it.
Well done. So we're going to hear a couple of stories about those of us who've been affected by, somebody better get somewhere and vote. We're going to hear a little bit about some stories. I'm going to, if I can go back to the slides. We already did this a little bit, but, well, no more slides? Slides? 3, 2, 1. No. We're going to hear from, let's go through those. We're going to hear from Bill O'Dowse, one of our board members, who had her own experience with generic drugs, and then I'm going to share mine with you. But come on up, and as I'm doing that, Harry Lever, we love you, and I know you're watching at home in Ohio, and we wanted to acknowledge that you brought this to my attention in 2007 with the heparin incident, and you haven't let it go. And we just lost the slide again, but we're going to get it back in a second. So Harry, thank you for everything you do. You know how much you mean to all of us here. And now, Bill, tell us your story about generic drugs.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Good evening, and my name is Bill O'Dowse. As Lisa said, I'm a board member plus HCM patient myself. And just like many of the HCM patients, we do not have one disease that we need to get under control. We generally have multiple comorbid situations, and I'm going to talk today about one of those, which is my hypothyroidism. So the most important thing when you, and it comes back to the generic drugs, right? So when you think of generic drugs, exactly as they had mentioned, that we all expect them to be exactly the same, and with their brand names, and they would be created to be identical in their form, dosage, safety, strength, method of administration, quality, and performance. And sometimes there are differences, and those differences are in the, packaging, manufacturing performance, maybe color, taste, etc. But the example I'm going to share with you is very, very important. The brand name for thyroid treatment is Synthroid for hypothyroidism, and then the generic name is levothyroxine. Well, this medicine is prescribed, as I said before, for hypothyroidism to keep thyroid hormone levels in balance, and it is to be taken for life. So when you start on the Synthroid treatment, it takes about 3 to 5 months to find the right dosage for the patient. It's not the same for everyone. Your blood work is done, and you are controlled with clinical evaluations to see, are you having any adverse events, or are you having any additional problems, and then your dose is adjusted accordingly. So we came to my happy point, and I was taking the branded drug for years. And then the employer-provided insurance told me that I should be switching to the generic. Just like I said, I had no other reason to expect that it shouldn't be identical or causing me problems. Well, that didn't happen. Within a month of changing from the brand to the generic, I started feeling sluggish. I started feeling very tired. My digestive system started acting up. And then I was really feeling, what is the best way? Overtired. So when you're working and you're so busy, you think, okay, I'm going to get some decent sleep, and I'm going to rest a little bit, catch up on that sleep that I lost, and I'll get all my energy back. Well, that didn't happen. So one day, as I was hurrying to get to work, I'm looking at myself in the mirror, and I said, gee, there's something really different. What is that difference? I realized half of my eyebrows had no hair left. I mean, it was just this little front portion that was thick. The rest was no hair. So I ran my hand over to it, and then I said, this is a weird hair loss problem. So I called my doctor. The first reaction was immediately get into the office. We need to do blood work, and we need to see what's going on. Well, as I said, it was the bad generic batch that caused this problem, and it took us 6 months to get it back to the desired levels. So when we are talking about, as everybody mentioned, on the waste and the time that it takes and what happens to the patient experience, here in my case, it was 6 months of additional blood work, going and seeing the doctor, and also taking time from work to get all these things done. So, as I said, this is not my only problem with the levothyroxine issue. When we looked at it, there were many recalls that took place in the recent years due to subpotency, and you all mentioned it, the impurities in the drug, and out of specification results because some batches have failed quality tests. Well, you do not know that as a layperson when you are taking a generic drug. So when we realized all of these things that have happened, because I was still on my employer insurance, my doctor was able to prescribe brand only for my medication. We continued that until my Medicare period. Medicare covers the generic, and we went through, again, the testing period to make sure nothing was changing. And honestly, I take it only from the one manufacturer that we can trust. So coming back to the tests and the quality, these are very, very critical. So again, I want to emphasize none of us are against taking generic drugs. Generic drugs help control prices and expenses for drug coverage and provide access to affordable medicines. We are all for stopping waste, but we all want and need efficacious, safe drugs, and we need more public disclosures about the qualities and the quality assurances. And as I explained, the bad quality generic drugs create waste and endanger patient lives. In this case, I was fine, but as we have discussed with other drugs, they have higher costs, and it is the patient lives, and increases unnecessary medical costs and results in lost wages for the time you have to take to go and obtain your medical care. So with that, I'll say safe and high-quality generic drugs should be viewed as national security, and you mentioned that. as most of the adult population in this country, and if you don't have to say it, but ask yourselves, at least one generic medicine is taken by everyone pretty much in this room. So with that, it is for all of our safety and well-being. And thank you for the great work you are all doing. And let's make sure that the legislation is passed and all this great work is amended for the whole public to benefit. Thank you. Thanks.
So I'm going to ask a question, and then I'm going to show you a thing. What's with that keeps going away? Can I have, there we go. So this bottle right here is what you're going to see up on the screen. So I know it's a little small, but I'm going to ask you to try to figure out where was this drug made, who made it. So I'll give you a hint. If you see the circle that just popped up there, it's written in about 4-point font, maybe a little bit smaller. And it says, Cipla USA. What country was it made in? Trick question, it's India. So the label on it says literally USA, because that's the name of the company, but it's actually manufactured in India and packaged in New Jersey. So you can think, oh, well, I'll look at my label and I'll look up and see where that drug was manufactured. You got to dig pretty deep to find this information. So that's part one. Part two, I'm literally standing here in front of you with my heart in my hands. Juliet, look away. This is my transplanted heart. Having a transplanted heart is not for the faint of heart. It took a lot of work, time, energy, and money to get Brandy's heart in my chest and this one out. I've put it down now, Juliet. You can turn around. This is my bottle of medication, my transplant medication, tacrolimus. That chart that David showed you about the bad tacrolimus, here it is. This is what I was taking for 7.5 years. I wondered why I continued to get shakes in the morning, because I was dumping the drug too fast into my system. And that makes you wonder, well, then how long did it actually last? It's supposed to be 12 hours. If I dumped it early, was I left with anything at the end? Was I open to rejection? Could this heart fail? These are really important questions. I kind of like this living thing. And I worked really hard to get here, and I want another 30 years out of this, because that's what you should get with a transplanted heart in 2025. And it shouldn't be wasted because of a $5 drug. So we need to do better. We must do better, not just for myself and transplant patients, but for the billions of dollars we are wasting on poor quality generic drugs. And I don't know what else I can say about that. Literally, people, I'm standing here with my heart in my hands talking to you and asking you for this help. So you see the color of that map? It's purple. It's not red, it's not blue, it's purple. All of the people on that map will take generic drugs. They will just do it, whether it's short-term or long-term. We need to protect every single one of them. They deserve high-quality generic drugs. So I'm going to ask two of our veterans with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy to come up and speak. First, Kevin O'Connor, one of our board members. Kevin, come on up and talk to us for a few minutes about your experience, and then we'll have Eric.
My name is Kevin, and I have a big heart. I used to think that was a great, awesome thing to have, and it is probably. Because I have a big heart, I've learned to take better care of myself. I've made a whole group of friends. But it does come with consequences. I've known I've had a big heart, I think, in the back of my mind since I was in the military. I was talking to Captain Bronnerman over there, and we talked about G.I. Joe crawling through underneath the wires while they would have the firing going over your head, although it was not live fire. It was blanks. But when I would stand up from that and try to run, I'd pass out. And I did that in the military a couple times, and they heard the distinct sounds of a murmur. But then it would disappear. And so they were frustrated because they needed to hear it and they needed to diagnose something in order to do something about it. So they told me, come back and take care of that. You need to keep coming back. And what do you do when you're in your late 19, 20 years old? You don't go back, right? You ghost them, and I did that. And I lived with HCM for many years and was not officially diagnosed until my mother was diagnosed. I've been down the road with this disease. It is pernicious. And I don't know what's more pernicious, this disease or the hurdles that we go through sometimes with insurers and getting proper care. And I've heard it all here today. I've heard a lot about injustices here today, right? I'm going through right now step therapy. I did the myectomy that was not successful, and now I'm being told, okay, you need to have a cardiac myosin inhibitor. And now my doctors are writing the letters at it's Wharton, right? So I hope that my doctors at NYU can write the kind of letters that you write, because, yeah. And it's amazing that the request goes in on April 1st and it's denied on April 1st. And then the next one goes in on April 2nd and it's denied on April 2nd, right? And that's what we deal with. And, you know, the other thing is, I will say that we deal with the ups and downs of drugs that release too quickly. And it is a real problem. And all you have to do is spend some time on our discussion board, and you can hear that it is a real problem. And for someone with a heart, and I'll end with this, but you know, I can get AFib with rapid ventricular response, which means that if I get into an AFib, then the ventricular rate can then just take off and do its own thing. And I could see my beat get up to somewhere in the mid-200s, 200, 250. That is very dangerous for a guy like me. So if I'm taking metoprolol, which is designed to keep me out of that rhythm, and it's not working right, that's the difference between life and death, really. It can be. And I've got a wife that I love very much and 3 children that I adore, and I want to stick around to see them grow up. And so please, if there's any injustices that we can fix, let's do it. And we can do that with some very simple fixes that we talked about today. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. And now we're going to hear from Eric. Come on down. Wrapping it up.
No pressure being the last speaker. They've all said amazing things, and today has been an eye-opener for me on multiple levels. So thank you both for the work you're doing, because like I said, it really opened my eyes to a lot today as well, just listening to you. My story began back in military days when I started having onset of symptoms. Started with high blood pressure, which did not run in our family. And I was on lisinopril. That's what that was the first drug that was prescribed, and continued on with that. I actually didn't find out or even hear the words hypertrophic cardiomyopathy until May of 2023. So 2001 to 2023. So over 20 years I've lived with just thinking that, you know, I was stressed and tired, going to doctors and being told that nothing's wrong. Finally, I found some answers with persistence. Our men and women who serve in the military should not have to question the drugs that they're putting in their bodies to protect us. No one should. So we're here today to hopefully bring awareness, but also ask for your action in helping protect all of us. It's an easy ask, and it comes with scientific data. So thank you for your time. Thanks for listening. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Eric. So technically he was not the last speaker. Ryan's going to be our last speaker, but the last patient story. So we have other legislative concerns at the HCMA that go beyond generic drugs or step therapy or prior authorizations. And I have some happy news to secondly report today. In our Hill visits, we've learned that Congresswoman McCormick is going to sponsor appropriations for the Hearts Act. I think we have, I'm just going to go ahead a little, I almost hit something wrong here. I'm just going to go ahead and show that slide real quick. So the Hearts Act was originally written by Pallone's office when I visited him back in 2009 after these 2 young men died in South Jersey. And he said, what can I do to help? So we talked about some things that could maybe help. That was 2009. A lot has happened since then. I literally had a change of heart. It was a transplant joke. You're allowed to laugh. So in December of 2024, AHA took up the fight and took this all the way to the finish line, almost, but there was no appropriations. So we now have a appropriations committee looking like Congresswoman McCormick sponsoring the appropriations for the Hearts Act with the full support of the ranking members of Appropriation Committee, Rosa DeLauro. So it looks like we might get some appropriations. At least we have a movement on the floor. So yay, thank you for that. We truly appreciate your assistance in this. And I'm going to hand it over to Ryan to go over the other fun stuff.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. And it's great to be here. My name is Ryan Googe. I'm the Executive Director of the Partnership to Advance Cardiovascular Health, or PATCH for short. We're a coalition of about 20 groups, including HCMA, that works on public policy that impacts access to care for heart patients. And so, as Lisa said, there are several bills that we are also working on with Lisa and others. I'll just very quickly just say that you've heard about a lot of this today. Step therapy, prior authorization reform. A little known fact is that cardiovascular medicine has actually seen some of the highest increases in step therapy and prior authorization protocols compared to most disease states. This has been the case for the last 10 years. And talk to any cardiologist, and you've heard from a few today, that the burden of getting appropriate treatment, whether it be a medication or a device to the appropriate patient, is very, very difficult today. And so there are some common sense reforms, some are on the screen, including the Safe Step Act. It's a prior authorization reforms that we've been pushing for. We do it at the state level, but we can also do it here in Congress. We're hoping that, in particular, the Safe Step Act will be reintroduced this Congress. The last three there that I would point out have to do with innovation and investment in innovation. There are a number of reforms that are looking at the Medicare drug price negotiation program. One that we have really pushed on is called the Mini Act, which actually would help heart patients in particular because there are several siRNA and ASO technologies that are in the pipeline for people that have something called the high lipoprotein a or high blood pressure. And the neat thing about these medications is that you can take them once or twice a year. You don't have to take them every day or every week. They are shots. There's actually one for amyloidosis that just got a new indication recently that is one of this new technology. So we want to incentivize that kind of innovation because the reality is, despite all the progress that we've had, heart disease is still the #1 killer in the United States, and we need new innovation in order to combat it. So would encourage you to look at these bills. If you have any questions, please let me know, or Lisa knows how to get me. It's been great. Congratulations, Lisa, on another fantastic day on the Hill, and thank you for the time.
We covered a lot in an hour and a half. I want to, before I get into my thank yous, we're in a very unusual time in terms of discovery, research, the tone that we're all living in today. I'm going to do something I don't normally do. I'm going to look right into the camera, and I am going to say to the leaders of this country, patients need you. We need access to care. We need safe drugs. We need you to focus on the needs of the citizens, and we need to make sure we're not getting sicker from things that we're paying money for. We got to get healthier. We want to be healthy. I worked really hard to be healthy. A lot of my friends have also worked really hard to be healthy. But some of them had to go through 2 heart transplants because of bad drugs. 2. We can do better. We must do better. And we're going to be here to work with you on finding solutions. We're going to talk to you about innovative ways that we've made improvements within our own community. The patient organization developed the model of care for hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. I don't know that any other disease can actually say that, but we developed the Center of Excellence care model and built it throughout the country to ensure people get safe, accurate care for their HCM. At the core, it's patient safety first. Always patient safety first. On my lapel is a green butterfly, and it is there for my sister Lori, who can't be here today because we lost her in 1995 to mismanaged HCM. We've come so far since then. It's almost 30 years. and we have made a difference. But we're going to need our policymakers, our leaders in biotech, our FDA representatives, our CDC representatives. We need everybody on this battle together. So we are hoping for brighter days ahead and innovative thinking. With that, I want to acknowledge my staff that is here today. I'll start here. We've got Julie Russo. Thank you very much. I'm going this way. Elena Morgan, Stacy Titus Brown, Linda Montgomery. Where did Amy go? Oh, she's over there. Can't see her. She's short. And Amy Blair. Thank them for their very, very hard work. Thank you to Allison, our photographer, and Transplant Warrior today, and our entire panel. And now we will take any questions that you might have. Julie has the microphone. Any comments from the panel? You're all quiet now. Somebody's got to have a question. Oh, I can't believe that. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Kate McQuarrie. I'm with the Medill News Service. And I'm wondering, this is a question for Mr. Suarez. I'm wondering, all of the work you've been doing has focused on the Defense Department's drug acquisition. Are you planning at all to expand that beyond just the Defense Department's drug acquisition to be able to service all Americans, not just those in the military or veterans, et cetera?
I alluded a little bit to that, and David mentioned this too, when we had a Senate testimony in the SAS, the Senate Armed Services Committee, back on 30 April. You can actually look up the film. Major General, retired, Lester Martinez Lopez. He was the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Health Affairs at the time. He was the one that pretty much greenlighted the DoD study. And as a matter of fact, in his testimony, he said that this was something that not only are we doing for the Defense Department and the 10 million beneficiaries, but this is a model for the nation. And so if you look at throughout the history of the Department of Defense, we've been really innovators and tech transfer pioneers in technologies that we all benefit in the civilian world every day. That can be from, like, how do we actually develop an evacuation and medical trauma system out of the Civil War that we have today, or medevac helicopters being used in Vietnam, to where now civilian life flights are, ubiquitous, to the internet, GPS technology. And this is just one additional area where the Defense Department was charged to lead in this area, develop a model through a study, and then we could scale that up to the nation. So yes.
Any other questions? Julie?
Just to add on to that real quick, from an operational perspective, I think it's very important to point out that unlike some other models that have been proposed, talked a little bit about the 5-star rating system that the FDA has talked about for over a decade. It's very hard to take an objective approach to something like quality management for facilities all over the world for many different kinds of drugs, and to have it be self-reported or voluntary. And that's what science enables us to do, is to really take an objective measuring stick. I mean, it sounds kind of silly or simplistic, like obviously you would rather have 0 lead than 4 micrograms or 2 micrograms. But that's what it takes, honestly, to make something that I think is very objective, right? And further than that, probably the most important part that really makes it a model for the nation is that it's attached to national drug codes, right? And I perhaps didn't point it out well enough in the slides, but we've looked at those national drug codes specifically within the DoD formulary, specifically in the private sector market sweeps, and they align very closely, and they're all the same codes. So point is that what the military is using in their system is the same national drug codes that any purchaser of drugs in the United States use, or payer. You could even imagine, a health insurer, whether it's private or public, Medicare, Medicaid, could perhaps better reimburse the green by a little bit and ding the red. The FDA could further inspect the red and perhaps give some carrots to the green. So there's many ways to use that because it's actionable, objective, and attached to the national drug codes that the entire U.S. healthcare system uses.
Thank you, David. Question.
Thank you so much. My name is Catherine Daly. I'm also with the Medill News Service. And I guess this is kind of for anyone, but I think maybe Mr. Suarez and Mr. Litt as well, you could speak to this. We've mentioned a few times kind of the current, very much changing world that we live in right now, country that we live in right now. Two major things we're seeing are obviously federal layoffs and now these new tariffs. With layoffs in the FDA, and then also with much of the APIs coming in from India and China, coming in from overseas. How are you all both dealing with this right now as things change so quickly, and also kind of expecting maybe to see this change the oversight landscape of generic drugs and the what generic drugs are on the market?
Sure, I can take the first part of this, and then Dave can probably complement it. A couple things. So even before any of the layoffs, we've always struggled in the last several years of just having enough investigators, basically inspectors at the FDA, to go out and oversee these regulatory oversights of these manufacturing plants in India and China and the world. They were very stretched. But there was a lot of flaws in some of the models that even last year they started to implement that I thought, and I even remarked on this in a couple public settings where I saw that there were some suggestions that came out of one of the House Energy and Commerce kind of hearings last year. And so a couple of things that are promising that they implemented last year was more increased no-notice inspections, even though that's very difficult. That's one. They were no longer going to send an individual investigator, some GS-12 that makes less than $100,000 a year by themselves going into mainland China. It's a very risky thing, especially when you understand the espionage laws that have been passed in China in the last 2 years. So I get to see this from a multifocal lens, right? I can see this from a scientific regulatory process. I can see this from a global supply chain process, but I also have the national security background to assess that it's a very vulnerable position to put a GS-12 by themselves in a communist country where the espionage law says that if you do something that might be perceived as negative against a Chinese company, you could be held in prison for that country. And so even it got so bad last year that the German regulators protested even going on mainland China because they were afraid they were going to be arrested. And oh, by the way, over a year ago, a Japanese pharma executive was arrested and put in prison in China because he called out a couple issues that he saw was a problem with one of their manufacturing sites. So what that brings to bear right now is the importance of doing independent testing to complement where the FDA has difficulty in reaching tough markets to regulate, right? And what a lot of people don't realize is up until about 1962, the FDA was doing testing for about 5,000 medicines up until the 60s. And what happened was that the majority of medicines that were produced up until that time frame was from big brand pharma companies that were in the United States or in Europe, Switzerland, Germany, et cetera. And they were making high quality medicines. When the FDA was testing them, they weren't seeing too many problems. So they switched in a federal law in 1962 with the Kefauver Amendment to switch to this new system called GMP, Good Manufacturing Practice. And GMP works well when you have an environment where the manufacturers are doing the right things when nobody is looking, right? Because it's a self-regulated process. If I find a problem in my manufacturing release testing, I will report that to the regulatory agency. I will do a corrective action, root cause analysis. I will find what the problems are. I will characterize it, and I will fix the problem. It's a continuous quality system. The problem is that when globalization happened in the 80s and 90s, you started seeing those shift to overseas manufacturers, and the normal manufacturers that made those drugs started shifting more to the higher end brand name new generation drugs. So as generics became more prolific as we got into the late 80s and 90s, Western manufacturers got out of the business. And then gasoline was poured on the fire because what happened was in 2001, when the Chinese were voted as a most favored nation trading partner in the World Trade Organization, their entire system said, we're going to own manufacturing, and we're going to start with owning all the key materials, right? The raw materials, the key starting materials, the active pharmaceutical ingredients, because they had an environment where they didn't really care about the environment. They could pay people either slave or low wages, and they had an unlimited supply of cheap labor. And their motive their motive was to target certain Western molecules that they could basically put out of business. And so what they did was the government of China subsidized several drugs for about a 3-year period so they can artificially deflate the price. And what happened was American companies and European allied countries could not compete with them because all the market went to those subsidized low-cost drugs. And so that's what we have right now is we're suffering from about 40 years of this decline, and now we're trying to do something about it. So what I would tell you is that the way you can offset the challenges the FDA has temporarily at least is to do more complementary independent testing to provide them intelligence to triage where they need to regulate, right? They're doing a regulatory process. The process that we're doing with the DoD or with Kaiser is a due diligence process. No different than if you had a global enterprise and you wanted to make sure that the books are straight. So you hire an independent auditing firm like Ernst & Young to go into the books of one of your sites in an overseas place to see if they're doing all the bookkeeping correctly, right? A third-party independent evaluation. That's how you keep markets to function properly. Now, when you talk about tariffs, what I would tell you there, because I've played a little bit in global trade and just policy, from a pharmaceutical standpoint, right now, tariffs make a very little dent in the generic pharmaceutical space, and this is why. They have so much more margin on their drug that even if you tariff them 25 or 50%, when they already have 3 or 4 times the margin than the Western manufacturers, it makes very little difference. Now, could strategic tariffs here and there make a difference? Partly, but they have to be very, very focused. And even the Biden administration did them, and so has the new Trump administration. What's a bigger ask, and really what will make the difference, is more incentives to produce those medicines here in the United States or with our allied partners in Europe, Japan, and Korea. If we can do that, basically Trade Agreement Act countries, that's the key. Because those countries are typically in a country where they have access to an independent judiciary, where markets can be trusted, investors can invest in new capital to build modern plants using new bioprocessing techniques, biocatalytic methods to make what was made today and previously under dirty chemical conditions. So really how we win out of this from a global standpoint is move the markets here in the United States and in Europe to use modern biotechnology methods in a cleaner environment to make these molecules, and you basically leap ahead. You automate a lot of that equipment, right? So now you reduce the incentive to use cheap or slave labor in an emerging market. And what you do over time is you can actually lower the price points, but it takes the government to recognize this, to invest with industry for this next generation technology. And that's how we get out of this problem in the long run.
Well, that was masterclass. David?
Not a whole lot to add to that, other than I'll say, just to highlight that on the China side, there's a great book called China RX by Rosemary Gibson that gets into a lot of what Vic mentioned in even greater detail. I think to summarize is that a lot of what we're seeing, whether it's cuts at the FDA, Vic pointed out that the GAO identified the FDA's foreign inspection program as high risk in 2009. Right, and has kept it there every single year. So I think that's, like I've said, the general process of review, of the GMP review, we hope gets better, but that's obviously complemented by the chemical quality independent review. And perhaps there's an argument that much more that we should be delving into that further. And I think very much the same high level on tariffs is that you've had 40 years of price pressure on the industry that moved it overseas. When you have a market based entirely on price, then you're only, how do you get there? Well, you cut corners. That you have a motivation to cut corners. I'm not saying that everybody does, but that gets you the race to the bottom, and that gets you an incentive to cut corners, and then we shouldn't be shocked that we have record levels of drug shortages and quality problems. So I think what's fundamentally most important and that is actionable with what we've talked about in these policy proposals is a market correction, right? A market correction to add true visibility to what's actually made in the United States, true visibility to objective measures of quality, and incentivizing that in a market that I think it absolutely can be done. It gets raised sometimes that, well, if you do too much on quality, you'll create drug shortages. I think it's an absurd argument. It's the reason we have the shortages in the first place. Like, obviously, we need to do something about it. And furthermore, I think it's very important that in all of these policy proposals and concepts to fix this $2 trillion global supply chain is that we are picking drugs. There's no magic bullet that you can snap your fingers and then it will solve it for the entire pharmaceutical industry or the generic pharmaceutical industry. But we're talking about essential medicines first. We're talking about a lot of markets that when you see the data there, there's lots of different suppliers. These are not markets that are in danger overnight for causing a drug shortage. And we can focus on these. And that's what even the legislation, the Track Pharma Act is about, is first the essential medicines. And we're even talking about 10% of them in the first year. That's 4 drugs. We can manage 4 drugs within a year to move the needle, create the system to grow it from there.
Any other questions or any other comments? Well, I think we have provided some education. I think we have had a masterclass on supply chain and global economics. Thank you, Vic. That was really quite fascinating. We all have a lot of work to do. And it's kind of have to start in this building and across the street and in this town. We're going to have to change public policy. We can't burn down the house while we're in it. We have to build the new houses and the new pathways, and we can build a better tomorrow. And we all deserve that. And with that, again, thank you to my entire team and the board members who are here today. Adam, Biller, Kevin, who else is on the board here? Is that it right now? Yes. Podcast editor Joey in the room. Yay, listen to Tales from the Heart. Thank you all for participating today. We got a couple more meetings tomorrow, and it's been a really, really busy and productive day. And thank you for joining us online. Thank you. Actually, I'm going to leave those here, and I'm going to give everybody.